Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. Charles, thank you very much indeed for setting the context for this particular discussion. As I mentioned in my introduction, junior mining is typically the engine of growth in the mining industry, as they are the ones who are prepared to take greater risk, both geologically and politically. But before I kind of hand over to the panel for what I'm sure is going to be a very interesting session, I can't resist making 4 comments from Charles's presentation, and I think hopefully these will form the context for much of our discussion. I'm a firm believer, and I'm sure my panel will join me in this when we chat about it, that there are new significant deposits to be found in Africa and the world, and even in Botswana itself. Who is to know if there's not a large Group 2 kimberlite sitting beneath the Kalahari sands? Group 2 kimberlites are not magnetic. Magnetic kimberlites are the ones that are typically found, and it requires new thinking and new technology to find these things. And if I move on to my second point here, how can we stimulate junior mining in Botswana itself? And indeed, if we look at maybe some of the other countries in the region, is that here's a bit of a challenge possibly to the government of Botswana and maybe some of the other governments in terms of perhaps relaxing the 10% royalty and replacing it with a waterfall tax. If you're looking at some of the kind of junior, more marginal mines, these may only have a 20% return. So 50% of that goes immediately up front to the fiscus. It makes these projects very, very marginal. And the way in which a government can kind of get a claw back if the project's very strong is having a waterfall tax. And I think by doing this in Botswana, perhaps there could be 2 or 3 junior mines which could be operating in this country. The third challenge I would like to give for the government of Botswana too as well is that we have a healthy exploration industry covering many minerals in this country. However, I'm sure much more can be done, especially seeing Botswana's status as being the 34th most attractive investment destination in the world. And my challenge is this: how about offering tax incentives to Botswana and local pension funds to invest in exploration and mimic something like the Canadian flow-through share schemes? And my final comment on Charles's presentation, he mentioned the company Lucara and how fabulous that is and how it is a role model for junior mining. And I 150% agree with that. But if you look at the history of that particular company, if it wasn't for the high risk-based decisions taken by an even smaller junior, my predecessor company, African Diamonds, that mine would be under a retention license. And it wouldn't be the jewel in Botswana's crown at the moment. And if you're interested, I wrote a paper which is published by the University of Botswana, giving the public history, I'm not giving the private history, of how that deposit was discovered, evaluated, and became the mine it was today. So if it wasn't for a junior, that mine wouldn't be where it is now. So with that as some kind of rather provocative kind of comments, I'm now going to get stuck into the panel discussion itself. As I mentioned in introduction, we've got a very learned panel of people who are working in Botswana and across Africa itself. And I'm going to start with a general question, just to kind of get the ball rolling. And I'm going to start with Dr. Roger Key to my left here. Is how important are junior companies within Botswana, and what is their contribution to the economy?
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. Well, obviously, I think they're extremely important. The juniors are prepared to take risks. We're very cost effective in terms of we have very little overheads, and we are employing local people, Botswana people, as well as local companies in doing specific tasks, specific technical tasks, if you like. We're focusing on geophysics, as both I'll explain later. We're working in the Kalahari region where there are no rocks, and we're reliant on geophysics. And there are local companies based in Botswana and in South Africa that we spent most of our money on. So I regard this as extremely important in supporting entrepreneurs and small businesses certainly within Botswana, but also within this part of Africa. So I think our main role is to employ local people and small local companies, whereas I think the bigger companies may actually have all their in-house expertise, whereas we support small companies.
Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Bangura, from the perspective of Guinea, how do you view the importance of junior companies?
Thanks, Gabriela. It's been a pleasure for me to be here, first of all, and I would like to thanks for the organizing committee here for bringing me here to speak about this important topic for the mining industry, which is a junior company in mining. Guinea is, as you know, is a very endowed with mineral deposit. It's mainly bauxite, iron ore. And the last few years we have been having a lot of like to develop those bauxite mining. But we don't want to be known as a mono-mineral country. We like to diversify. And that's diversification process. We try to set up things that can attract junior mining company to come work with us. We try to improve the database for the junior mining company. We try to do some geochemistry, some geophysical studies, some specific area, all that to create an environment that can help those companies do the process with us. Guinea, we like to have those mining companies with us in this process. Why? Because they are risk takers. And in order to go ahead in this risky business, we have to take risk. If we cannot move on. Also, as somebody just told here, those companies have a really low overhead. And, if the management ladder are very thin, you can meet today the CEO of the company, discuss everything you want for the project in a few minutes, in a very short time. That's really important for us to move on. Also, as Dr. Ju said here, they are up to using local employees in order to process the program in the field. Most of the junior geologists, most of the small companies are working, they use, the local companies in order to process in a manner, very quick manner, their process. That's what I've done for now.
Thank you very much indeed. Simon, the DRC. Now, do you have junior companies operating there, and how important are they to you?
Thank you, James. If I may first, of course, thanks the organizer of this African Mining Summit for inviting me to share with you the DRC experience. Of course, we have some junior mining companies, and most of the problem highlighted by Charles, they do experience that in terms of finding how we can get support. I can see two different types of junior mining companies. Those who really are, I would say, serious about starting a business. Those who are trying their luck, but mainly trying to speculate, just to raise funds and quick sell their assets. And I would add maybe a third one, which is the local, when I'm talking about the Congolese who are trying to really to start a mining business. So Those are the three different type of junior mining we have. Most of the problem, I think, like I said earlier on, are common. Of course, everything starts small before being taken over by the big companies. The junior mining, we have 3 of them in the copper business. There's still some who are trying to, and especially when we talk about the cobalt, and as you know, the DRC holds about 3/4 of the cobalt reserves. When the cobalt price was nearly 100,000 ton, there was $100 per ton. There was a rush to find the cobalt, and I think people, and that's where the junior must take risk and also get fund, because generally they do look at where the most prospective area are before really taking the risk. And that's where, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about how to empower the junior mining companies to go about, because we cannot have big companies or big thing without going through junior first in most of the cases. I'll stop there. And
thank you very much indeed, Simon. I'd now like to move on to a slightly more technical debate, and as I've got a colleague from the private sector here and then colleagues from the government sector as well, is and maybe Roger, you could kick this one off. How can the Geological Survey help you as leading a junior exploration company in Botswana, incentivize you and make your work easier?
Well, this is the main point of interest for me, obviously, as I spent a large part of my career in the National Geological Survey. For Botswana, whose growth has been fueled by the mineral industry, the Geological Survey has to be for me, the most important of the departments within the whole of the government. And I'm obviously biased in saying this, but exploration for minerals is based on the knowledge of the geology of the country. And that geology has to keep a pace with technology, and it has to develop. And our exploration is in the Moropo Farms on a complex as part of the Bushveld Large Igneous Province. And all the knowledge for that has been based on work done by the Geological Survey of Botswana initially. It was primarily by regional and national geophysical surveys that were controlled by the Geological Survey, and that data is vital. Without that data, we don't know where to explore. And I feel that, and I think that the National Geological Survey should actually have a role in partnership with junior companies, and there's both sides gain for this. The staff of the Geological Survey can learn from the expertise of the exploration company, and equally the exploration company can gain from the knowledge of the National Geological Survey. And we do need continuous improvement in the knowledge of the geology of a country. It's vital, and our exploration is based on a model that's based on mines that are in other parts of the world. So we know the geology in our area is identical to the geology where mines are operating in other parts of the world, and without that knowledge, we wouldn't know where to work. And so I say that there's got to be a national program of geology, geophysics, geochemistry that will attract junior companies to come to a country. And yes, so yeah.
I think that's a very, very important, Rogers. And I, with my kind of private sector hat on, have to fully endorse what you say. So I've got two colleagues from the government sector here. You've heard what Rogers had to say, and I think most junior company CEOs would completely concur with it. So Alkali, what is your view in Guinea in terms of progressing the work of the Geological Survey in that country to look at more advanced mapping techniques, look at different geophysical surveys, and to make that kind of data publicly available so explorers can re-establish themselves in the country.
As I say, Dr. Shala, is that the work of the geological survey is of a great importance for the junior or for the development of the mining sector. In Guinea, we understand that very early. And first of all, we try to do the mapping, the geological mapping of the whole country. Today, the whole country is covered by geological mapping of at the scale of 1 or 2,100. And we did also, with the geological survey, a geophysical program covering the whole country, which data has been now made available right now. We call that the AMTEC database. And still, the geological survey, knowing that the mining is an important sector in Guinea, is heading on some other works, like doing the geochemistry in some specific area where we think there are more chance to find some mineral deposit. We're doing also some geostructural study. We know that Guinea has a large band of the Birimian Basin. We have a large chunk also of the West African Shield, and also we are part of the Mauritanian. All that structure are geologically interpreted in order to make them available for the people who are looking for mineral deposit, because all those mass of information are of very great importance to follow on the geological, on the mining development of Guinea.
Thank you very much. Simon, the DRC is a very large country, geologically very complex, so you've probably got the most difficult job in your country. Could you please tell us how you're tackling it?
You're right, James. The DRC is a huge country. I'm sure for those who have the size of South Africa, it's about 3 times of, you see, the whole of Western Europe. So with also 9 countries around, so you see how complex they are. Up to now, most of our survey done on or geological data we had was done in colonial area. The new discovery you heard about the Kakula, Kamoa, those came with the older data we had. But with the new mining code in place, we started doing the mapping of the country. But can you imagine, it's a huge, so you need to do portion by portion to get a really good mapping. We are busy right now doing it, even going through those provinces, I would say, or parts of the country were known, but not well known as such. And I think it's very important that we map the whole of the DRC, because right now we only talk about copper on the Katanga province, and when you go up north, you see the gold and the diamond at the center. But I think with the discovery of the biggest copper mine, which is the Kamoa Kakula one, and which comes out of, I would say, the logic field for the geologists. The rocks are not the same as when we discover copper. So it's important that the mapping of the whole DRC be done, so that we can discover some more. So why not, and develop more mines. So we are busy doing the mapping right now, and that's a very important one.
Thank you, Simon. I'm going to move on to progressively more challenging questions, and no apologies to my learned panel here. Roger, starting again with yourself. What are your sources, and what do you believe the sources of funds are for exploration?
Yes, well, thank you. Well, this is obviously a very critical question. We have managed to, you fund incrementally when you're a junior. You fund the first phase, the second phase, the third phase, and obviously depending on how successful you are in each phase, it does become progressively easier, and you can get larger amounts. But you start off basically by gaining the trust of individuals. Unfortunately, the companies aren't going to invest in you at the start. So to start off with, it's almost on a personal basis with people who trust you, and that's how we started. And then that funded the first phase of exploration. Then we managed then to present a model to small listed companies who invested, and that has grown. But it starts off, it's who you know, and that's our experience.
I'd like to just maybe add to that rather kind of tongue-in-cheek. My chairman has got a euphemism for that, and he calls it the 3 Fs. We fund from the 3 Fs. Friends, families and fools.
Well, yes. Well, one of the investors, I won't say his name, he said, well, it's a slow way of losing money than betting on the horses. And yes.
Al-Khali, in Guinea, is there money available for junior companies to explore? And if there isn't, where would you say one should get the money from?
To tell you the truth, there is no money available for junior set up there. But one thing we try to do right now, beside using family, friends, and the food, if I can, but is that the government is trying to set up a fund, what they call a mining investment fund, which will receive about 5% of all income the government is earning from the mining sector. And that part of that money is dedicated to support some local Guinean and that would like to go into mining because we think that in order to make more prosperity in the country, the Guinean also have to be actors in the mining sectors. Another way, people rely on the outside to find money.
Al-Khali, thank you very much. If I could just make maybe a small comment before handing over to Simon. Some countries are considering a sovereign wealth fund, which would then make strategic investments in junior explorers. And the argument behind this is not only is that country determining its own future, but and I'm sure Roger will agree with my next statement, is typically when juniors like us try and raise money offshore, typically Australia, Canada or the UK, they ask you the first question, is management investing in the company? If you say yes, you get on to the second question. The second question is, are there local people investing in the company? If it's a Botswana company in Botswana, if it's a Guinean company in Guinea. And sadly, that second question is often a no, which makes it more difficult to get to the third question is, tell me about your project. So, Simon, from the DRC, how are you looking at this particular challenge?
I'll start where you stopped. Because, yeah, exactly, because having fun is really the critical part. And I think, as you said, with the new mining code in the DRC, we also have set up a sovereign fund, just to answer the second question so that we can move to the third one. Because that's a critical part. You have a junior mining company who would like to start a project, but they can't raise funds. how do you do about it? Unless you are connected, unless you have some friends, unless you have someone at the Australian Stock Exchange or at the AIM in London or in Toronto, but still, it's quite difficult. And we want local to participate in the project, just to make the project also viable and also so that it can move on. And that's where I think African government must really make an effort now, and I can see His Excellency the Minister of Mines of Uganda. That way of thinking, having a sovereign fund is capital. It's capital just to boost the local to participate in some of the project, and that really will help not only to fund but to create also value for the country. That's critical.
Simon, that's wonderful. If I could just continue your conversation here, because a very important aspect is that when these juniors become majors or when these juniors become mining companies, there are obviously questions that are asked locally about why do foreign investors chiefly own these projects. How can we, if I'd like to develop that again, starting with Roger, how can we kind of overcome that dynamic in that most of the funds come from offshore? Some countries are beginning to contemplate sovereign wealth funds, and I applaud the work you're doing there, Simon, but overcome the political dynamic of local ownership. Quite a complex question. Roger, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yes. One thing I should add is that also what we've found is that you start off simply and all your effort goes into the actual technology of finding the deposit. But as you progress, more and more of your time and funds goes on management issues, legal things, accountancy, and I think that's almost inevitable. But I think, you know, when you talk about sovereign funds and things, I think you've got to remember that the money has to go into the exploration and not into other aspects, and you can get carried away with administrative things and you take your eye off the ball. And I think and getting money locally is very, very difficult. You know, because you're talking about quite large sums of money, and you know, and it's risky. You know, the people we've got invested in, we've told them that, you know, you could either walk away with a fortune or you're going to walk away with nothing. And I think you've got to be ruthlessly honest with people, and to apologise to anyone, but you can't bullshit people. Because you've got to be straight, and I think that's how we've been successful in raising funds. And I think that if you're talking about sovereign funds, you've got to have people who know what they're doing in charge of them. And they've got to be aware that there are risks, and that there is potential reward. But we haven't. I have to confess, we haven't looked within Botswana for funds. Yeah, at the moment.
Simon, I've been looking for funds in Botswana for maybe 15 years. And with African Diamonds, we actually brought up local ownership because it was also listed on the Botswana Stock Exchange at about 20%. But sadly, with Botswana Diamonds, because the projects are more early stage, I haven't been able to raise any money locally. I think they'll come in when it's a bankable feasibility. Al-Khali, how would you look at this particular political dynamic of local ownership and offshore funding on the assumption that these junior companies, some at least, will inevitably be successful?
This is a very difficult question. I mean, because it's true. Those companies, there's no money being raised for this junior mining company locally. And one thing we try to do in Guinea is to try to sensitize people to go into mining, and because most of the people who have money go into trading, the quick money makers, and that's where they go. While when you go to mining, you have to put the money into something that may be at least take 10 years before you start seeing things. So it's a matter of people not mindset into mining as a business. I think there is a work that has to be done on that process in Guinea, I think in most of those our African countries, in order to get those local involved in mining or invest in mining. Because if we take the case of Guinea, even the local banks, very few lend to the mining company because they are looking for quick return on the money. As I said earlier, one of the things we try to think is it's not a real big sovereign fund, but it's a mining investment fund that can be used as a seed to process some few local that are interested into going into mining sector. Also, we try to look at the regulation in order to encourage people to satisfy them, in order to get a permit, exploration permit, and later on go on aboard to look for partnership in order to process in that field.
Thank you very much, Al-Khalid. Simon, you planted the seed for this particular question. How are you tackling it from the perspective of your country?
Local ownership, I personally believe that it's very key to the development, to the future of mining. For few reasons. First of all, give security to investors that the local are involved also in the project. So they'll take care of all the headaches to solve the problem on the ground with admin problem. And because right now what we see is most of the time in our country we see a free carry from the government. It can be 10%, 15%, but that doesn't really help in the project. And if you have local ownership or local participating in the project itself, I'm sure that gives a strength to the project. The problem again is how the local gonna get fund to put in the project. That's the key. Local banks sometimes they don't have the capacity to be able to borrow, to get that money, and especially at this early stage when you have exploration, the risk is high. You don't have security to give to those banks. So it's a question of chicken and egg. Where do you start? And that's where we need to solve. And I think one of the ways of solving the problem, I think, could be the sovereign fund, where the government will be able to borrow money to the locals so that they can be able to participate in such a project. And I think that would be wise, instead of the government waiting, just having a 10% free carry, and they don't have anything, they don't participate really in the project, and they are not active. I would need more, maybe 20-30% that are owned by local, so that they get also involved in the development of the mining sector. It's important.
Thank you, Simon. I'd like to continue with you, Simon, then coming on to you, Al-Khalid, for this question before asking Roger a different question. I mentioned in my introduction about governments providing tax incentives for investors to invest in exploration in other companies. The role model, of course, is the Canadian flow-through share scheme, where investors can get a marginal tax rate reduction in their investments in this. So, if your marginal tax rate is 50%, for example, you can afford to lose 50% on your investment and still actually be even. And what that has done, that stimulated Canada as being the hub of the global exploration industry. So my question to Simon and Al-Khali, why are not African governments looking at that? Because there are high net worth individuals in your countries and across the rest of Africa. Sorry, I did warn you the questions could get a little bit taxing. No pun intended.
Okay.
Okay, Al-Khali, please, thank you.
Okay. I think we try that perspective, to develop to look at the mining project. And if we take the mining code for Guinea right now, we have a very favorable fiscal term in order to encourage people to come to Guinea. But one of other things we try to do is to analyze the project on the basis of its merit, and because we like to develop the project. If there is some things the government can do in order to make the project sellable, viable, we'll do that. We sit down with the company, try to look at all parameters of the project and see what the government can do in its power in order to make this project attractive, either by playing on the fiscal regime, or try to give them some other incentive in order to reduce the cost, so the project can be very, at least viable for the investors.
Thank you very much, Al-Khali. Simon, would the DRC consider tax incentives for local pension funds, local investors in exploration? And if you do you think it's a good idea? Sorry, if you don't, do you think it's a good idea?
Answering your question, that means that you also have strong local funds, the pension fund available. You see, most of the African countries are not organized, haven't reached the level where you have enough pension fund available to be used to put in the mining industry. So that's where now the incentive has come from the government, and the government also need money. So it's quite a tricky question. Of course, the government must look at long-term vision. They say, what are we losing by giving the incentive to such a project? And this is very difficult because all the projects are not seen at the same way. Therefore, incentives, yes, we have incentive in our investment code, just for people to help them to start. But these are, I would say, minor start. It goes from 3 to 5 years just to help them to start. But in terms of mining, when talking about the mining itself, the government will have to have a quick return, want to benefit quickly. So they are, I would say, they are a little bit trapped, but I think that they have to give incentive and wait for at least 5 years before starting getting a return on that, while actually the budget is small and they want to have money. So it's not an easy thing. Depending on really, we'll go case by case, but again, you cannot give incentives to a particular one we are giving it to another one. So it needs to be across the board. And that's remembering the question at the table, I would say. I'm sitting on the private sector now. I used to be in the government, but I'm sitting on the private sector now. So I can see the two views as difficult. But at the end of the day, we have to look in the future what do we want for our country? Because most of at the governor level, not only we look at the mandate, what I want to achieve in the next 5 years, because I'm in office right now. I think they should think about 10, 20, 50 years. What I'm taking the decision now, or what decision we're taking to put our country in that level. That's the way we should think, and that's where incentives are very important, so that you can create jobs, can create company, and you can bring value added to your assets.
Thank you very much indeed, Simon. I'm going to ask Roger the final question before I hand over to the floor. And as we did last time, please, I'll take 3 questions. Please announce who you are and who you represent, and then I'll direct those questions to the panel if you don't direct them yourself. So Roger, the final question to you is, it's a very broad question, so I'm giving you free rein here. What are your greatest challenges, and how could you overcome them as a junior explorer?
Yeah, okay, well, obviously the greatest challenge is getting the money. I'm pretty surprised by that. I think, obviously we've got to be positive in that. One thing I said, in Botswana, it's easy to get an exploration license, and it's straightforward. So, we've got to be positive. So, Botswana is a great place to come, and I'm boosting Botswana here, but it is a good place to come and explore, and I think that's worth saying. So the challenge is getting the money, and after that it's up to you basically. Obviously, it starts off very simply. You're focused on you've got a model for the geology, and you organise that. But then it becomes, as you become successful, is the wrong word because we haven't found anything yet. But as you become more successful in raising money, then the challenges become that you've got to organise all aspects of money, in terms of, there are legal obligations when you've got partners who are listed companies. I've got to be very careful what I say now on technical matters. I can't tell you, what our latest results from the geophysics. But that's fair enough. No, the main challenge and the only challenge is getting the money, and then getting the trust of the people who've given you the money. The last thing you want is interference from people. They've got to have enough confidence in you to let you get on with spending their money. One of the challenges that we are facing is this environmental issue. Obviously, we're all concerned about the environment. It's probably top of our agenda for all of us now, that you've got to be aware of any environmental problems, and that is a challenge in that we have to produce an environmental management plan before we drill. No problem with that, but then we have to go to registered environmental people in Botswana. You have to people that are registered with the government, and obviously you get quotes. And the quotes are incredibly, but to the factor of 10 between the cheapest and the most expensive. So there is a challenge in monitoring the environmental management of projects. And I think that actually is probably our main challenge. And we're all keen to look after the environment. I think miners have got a very bad reputation, and I think it's very unfair. But it's a fact of life that we have to accept, that we are looked upon as the bad boys by the green lobby, and we've got to be more than better than all other industries in environmental challenges, and especially from the DRC. You're getting in the net more than anybody at the moment. Yes, so those are the two challenges: money and environment.
Thank you very much indeed, Roger. We'll now hand over to the audience, and if my colleagues from GRV could take the mics, and if you could put your hands up, please. There's a gentleman here on the left, first question. Second question, a gentleman there just to your left as well. We'll take the second one. And is there a third? Maybe a bit tired from yesterday's festivities at Mokololi, possibly. Looking for a third before I take the first? Going? Going? Don't be shy. Okay, gone. So let's take the first question.
Good morning and thank you. My name is Diabong Bisai from Botswana Geoscience Institute. I just want to touch on the point of how geological surveys can assist juniors in their exploration activities. I think Roger Key touched on that. It is important that geological surveys provide the necessary baseline information like geological maps, geophysical maps, geochem maps. But I think we're going to move from that to go beyond provision of data and provide information. And even go beyond information, go into the knowledge aspect. Because the days of providing data alone are gone. We expect geological surveys to be providing the value-added information. And also, it's critical that juniors understand their role in the geological survey, the way they operate. Geological surveys cannot operate like exploration companies. Juniors also have to think beyond the prospecting licenses, which is the space that geological surveys operate, in understanding the mineral systems and not just be focused on the activities of the exploration companies. So if juniors can appreciate that, they have to also contribute in understanding the bigger picture and not be focused in small areas. That will reduce the perceptions that geological surveys are working for particular exploration companies. I think this is a critical point in that we don't want to see companies pointing fingers at geological surveys, that they are now more involved in assisting specific companies and not understanding the broader picture. And it would also be important for exploration companies. Here I'm saying exploration, could be mining companies, to assist in the platforms that are used in the provision of the information itself. Because that's when the major challenge for geological surveys is. You may find that the information is there, but the way they take it to the exploration companies is the information is not accessible. So it could be critical for companies to assist in sponsoring such platforms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the gentleman just here to your left, put your hand up again. Oh, you got great. Thank you.
Yes. My name is Mchahamoloi from Mujave Resources in South Africa. I think it's Mr. Dumawaku who described 3 different types of junior companies. And I thought that in answering the various questions, we would address them, at least following his description, because I thought that was very cryptic. My emphasis is on the local junior companies. The Australian junior company or a junior company from Canada has a lot of home support. So if you're looking at your 3 Fs, they will have their own money to put in. They will have family at home that has got resources that could put in. And also because they've got track record, they've got a number of people that they can fool to bring money into the project. But if you are a homegrown Botswana or South African or DRC or Guinean junior company, you don't have your own capital. You don't have families and friends that can help you. And because you don't have track record, you don't have people that you can fool to put money into a project. So how do you finance a project? How do you start it? The second part to the question is, whilst I agree that, for instance, in Canada, the flow-through shares played an important role in stimulating the exploration, junior exploration companies, the part of the economy that played a fundamental role was the stock exchange. And that is true for both Canada and Australia. And the issue is that in Africa, the stock exchanges are not as conducive to junior companies. I mean, you can look at, for instance, on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, you've got maybe less than 10 companies on the junior sector, 5 of which are suspended at the moment. We can look at the stock exchange in Botswana and in various African countries. So the stock exchanges are not really conducive for junior companies. So if that doesn't work for local juniors, how can they be financed? And how can they be supported?
Excellent question, thank you. So I've kind of dissected 3 questions from the 2 questions and comments by the gentleman in the audience, now directed to each one of you. So we'll all get a question each. Roger, I'm going to give you the first question, which flows from my colleague from the Botswana Geological Survey, and he's asked 2 questions, so if you could give a brief answer to these 2. The 2 being, how can juniors take a broader geological view, because that's the agenda of the Geological Survey, but it's not the agenda of the Explorer, who's restricted to his or her PL. And secondly, would junior companies in general consider sponsorship of various geological surveys or on different technological platforms?
Well, thank you, for that. We've got to be, the junior has got to be focused. That is the fundamental. You have a model, you focus on it. And you've got the broader picture before you go in. You focus on your project. And then at the end of it, then you present that data to the Geological Survey. And then you can either publish that and put it into a regional context. But so I think it's obviously the role of not just the Geological Survey, but everybody who's involved in exploration and to contribute to the bigger picture. And I think that could be done in partnership with the Geological Survey as a means of growing the knowledge of the people in the geological survey. And then I think sponsoring, money is tight when you're a junior, and we certainly could not sponsor anybody. We'd get laughed at by our investors, I'm afraid, quite seriously. But we'd be more than happy to have a partnership whereby somebody from the Geological Survey could join our exploration team, but they'd have to be self-funded. You've got to be brutally honest with this. Money is tight. But, we'd love to be in a partnership with the Geological Survey. We'd welcome it, and because we both benefit from that. But no way did we even think about, sponsoring them. No. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Very, very clear. The 2 questions which flow from Mr. Malloy, and I must agree with your sentiments there. There are, he poses at the point, there are no local friends, families and fools. I have a slightly different take on that. If you look at the number of high net worth individuals in South Africa and even in Botswana, you've got to ask the question, where is 10% of their wealth going? Because typically what would happen is 90% would be in safe investments, or supposedly safe investments, and 10% would be in discretionary high-risk investments. And if you add up the 10% of the wealth of the number of high net worth individuals in South Africa and Botswana, I've done the research work on it, I pose the question that money is offshore and it's coming in via offshore. It's actually not coming in locally. So my question, the 2 questions I'm going to disaggregate, and Simon Al-Kali, you can choose which one of the 2 you want. First question is, there are no local friends, families and fools, so what can be done? And the second question was, Mr. Malloy raised a very important point about the fundamental role of a stock exchange, trading stocks in this kind of area. Why have we in Africa not really embraced the stock exchange model? So who would like to take the stock exchange? Who would like to take the 3 Fs? Al-Kali, you go first.
As we said earlier, is the getting a local into mining is a big headache. For one reason that people do not mainly appreciate the whole spectrum of the mining project. And we don't have the 3F here. And what you do then? In that case, we, as some people have said before, is a headache. A headache that can be solved partly by government trying to take in their hand and this issue and trying to come up with even not the total solution, but a partial solution to it. We just mentioned having the sovereign funds. That's really part of it. And also, like in Guinea, we try to give to some local we set up some area, what we call a strategic area, where we can give a permit to local on a specific basis or specific condition. So that can reduce the intake of investment for them. Or sometimes even we try to, with the geological survey, try to give them some geologists working with them on the first step, so they can have a feet on the ground in order to guide them in their work. Those are few things people can do, but I think the bulk of the work will lie with the government trying to find a solution to the problem.
Thank you very much, Al-Khali. Simon, the stock exchange issue, does the DRC have one? And if not, are you contemplating it?
The DRC doesn't have a stock exchange. So very difficult for me to comment on that.
Should you have one?
Should we have one? We shouldn't just have a stock exchange because we have to have a stock exchange. We need to, first of all, to understand how does the stock exchange work and how is it going to really enhance the local to uplift or to create value. That's a critical one, because I know if the stock exchange is there to be able to people to raise money and could help junior mining to go through to start project, that's perfect. I'll go for it. Because so we shouldn't just copy just for the sake of copying the things. But it's important. But I'm not saying the stock exchange is not good, but I think it's very important to know how it's going to work for the DRC. And for the rest, I mean, yes, local junior mining are struggling really, and I've lived myself trying to start a small gold mining company for the last 6 years, going around the world to try to raise funds. My financial model was just to be able to raise funds and have an off-take agreement so that I can reimburse by selling the gold. But most of the people want to give you money, they want to be your partner inside the project, want to take some share inside. That's not the kind of model I wanted. But you end up doing that because after 6 years, 7 years, you can't raise money, and on the other side also, our government, because we don't have money available, we don't have a sovereign fund, they cannot help you. That's why I say maybe the government should be able to offset or to give security to the local bank to help the junior miner to be able to go with the project. That's critical. We need to find a financial model where the government comes in just as maybe government bond as a security, and then you can raise funds through the banks really to help, because to raise $20 million local banks is not the easy one, because you have to put everything you have as a guarantee, house or whatever, and it's at risk. And sometimes you don't take that kind of risk, personal risk, because as a junior, you end up losing everything. That's a big risk you have. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Simon. And just as a final kind of comment from myself, I've done a fair amount of research in this area, and I've found that the most successful juniors actually come from so-called mining incubators, which are very, very few and far between around the world. Probably, two of the best known are the Hunter Dickinson Group out of Vancouver, the Lundin Group, who owns Lucara, and then the group I belong to, the 162 Group of companies. And here you've got a confluence of technical, corporate, financial, political, and the 3 Fs that all go along with it. And it's a bit like a junior company is a bit like a child. These incubators start the company from birth, take them through those challenging phases of adolescence, and when they reach adulthood, they let them fly and let them go. So maybe there is an opportunity in Southern Africa, because we have all of those skills and we have the 3 Fs, to actually look at creating an incubator. So on that note, I'd like to thank the panel. Please could give them a large round of applause.